We all doing okay? I feel like attendance is a little low right now. I taught another class this morning. Attendance was a little low. So again, I think people are just sort of losing steam. But we will do
I
our
know some
best.
people just got the. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Simone.
Oh, that some people are getting the vaccine.
Yeah,
And I know some people might not be feeling well because of that.
yeah. Absolutely. That's a good point. I saw the vaccine clinic. I didn't actually read all the details, but can you just like go get a shot today or in the near future? When is it today?
I mean, I already got my vaccine,
Yeah.
but it's you can. I think you can go today to the vaccine clinic.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think I saw that email. Did anybody
I'm
take?
not entirely sure though.
Did
I
anybody
wouldn't
take
like.
your? I guess maybe some people who did wouldn't be here, so that might explain the absence of people. Here, I'll get this thing going. Lauren's here now, so I won't bother all of you as much as I would otherwise. Lauren is here to play with me. As long as I have someone to talk to, then I feel like I'm not just speaking into the void. Um, how's it going, Lauren? Pretty good. So we're just talking about things that are on the horizon. We got a small assignment due next week, forum post, nothing new, nothing crazy. And then beyond that, a little extra credit, a little final paper, and that'll be it. Um, okay, any questions about stuff before we move on? Are we all good? Well, let's get started. So this is a book about a Hmong family. They're called the Lees, the Lee family. The mom's name is Phoa. The dad's name is Nao Kao. They are both important characters in this book. And the daughter is Leah Lee. She's kind of the main character in a way. This whole book is about her. Her face is on the cover. This is at least on my edition, this is an illustration of the picture that is on the slide. Maybe you can tell she's wearing the same hat, but it's sort of an artist representation here. You can probably also tell she's in a wheelchair if you look carefully. And maybe you already know why she's in a wheelchair. Maybe you don't. If you don't, then we'll find out. So this is a book called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. The way you pronounce that in Hmong is Kauda Pe. I think these last syllables go unpronounced, so it's Kauda Pe. And there's a, did I give you information on this? I think I did in the last slide. Yeah, pronunciations are on 305 to 306. So that's something I didn't discover the first time I read it until kind of late. But yeah, in my edition, it's right before the notes, 305, orthography, pronunciation, quotation. So yeah, here we see the word spelled out in kind of this Hmong transliteration, Qagdabpeg, literally the spirit catches you and you fall down. The Hmong term for epilepsy, pronounced Kaudape. So why is it called spirit catches you and you fall down? What is this talking about?
I think it's a literal interpretation of
Okay.
it, because like when people quote unquote get possessed, so like when a spirit catches you, they shake, which is what happens in the seizure, and then you fall down because your body can't stay still.
Okay, very good. So if you couldn't hear what Isa said at the beginning is when a spirit catches you and it's almost like you become possessed. Although I think there's a slight difference between being caught by these spirits and being possessed, right? Because being possessed means the spirit is inside of you, right? And I don't think that's exactly what happens, but it's pretty close. Maybe I'm being I'm paying too close attention to the words, but yeah, Ice is absolutely right. It's talking about seizures, and so you fall to the ground and you shake and have a seizure. Simone?
No, I was just thinking that it's also about faith.
Uh-huh. How is it about faith?
The spirit catches you.
Yeah. So what
And that there's
what does that say about faith to you?
Um, well, when you fall down, you're just something that you can always rely on, which is religion.
Hmm. I think Simone might have thought of the Holy Spirit. Were you thinking of the Holy Spirit?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, because I'm not really sure what the Holy Spirit does.
Yeah. Well, so spirit is an interesting word here, right? Because in Christianity, you've got the Trinity, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I'm not a scholar of Christianity, but I've heard those terms before, right? And so, what does the Holy Spirit refer to there? Have you guys ever like been in church and people kind of feel the Spirit? You know what I'm talking about?
I mean, but in church it's seen as a good thing. When the Holy Spirit like catches someone and they start speaking in tongues or whatever, it's like a good thing because like apparently God has blessed you enough, or He sees you worthy enough
Mhm.
to use your body as a vessel.
Yeah, so actually, we're talking about two related things, but they're also a little bit different. So, what Isa just said is this is God coming down, and somebody might speak in tongues, right? And so, it's God maybe almost possessing someone. They probably wouldn't use that language, but inspiring someone maybe. And what Mhm. Yeah. Or sometimes even heal, right? Like, Holy Spirit, heal this person, heal, right? Yes. It's sort of a stereotype. I think Pentecostals are famous for these sorts of practices. Again, I'm not a specialist in these things, so I don't want to give you guys false information. What we're talking about here, though, is actually a little bit different. It's similar in a way, but how is it different? How is this spirit catches you and you fall down different from a more Holy Ghost, a more Holy Spirit? What is a dub? Is this a word you guys are able to read now? DAB? What is that? It's a malicious spirit. Yeah. So this is not God coming down. This is obviously someone dressed up as the bad spirit, but this is a malevolent spirit, cause of disease and other problems. So you don't want to get caught by this spirit. This is actually a spirit you don't want to get caught by. And I give you page 20. It's where the term gets explained. The chapter is called "The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down." And we also learn on the next page. What do we learn? If somebody, yeah, um, Hmong epileptics often become shamans. Their seizures are thought to be evidence that they have the power to perceive things other people cannot see, as well as facilitating their entry into trances and a prerequisite for their journey into the realm of the unseen. So, what is a shaman? Have you guys heard this word before? Shaman. Spiritual healer. Yeah. Did you know about this word before we read this book? Have you ever heard that term before? Shamanism? Yeah. So it's not limited to Hmong society. In fact, a lot of Asia we could use this term to refer to kind of the popular religion for a lot of Asia. Some people don't like this word because it draws a connection between the popular religions of different peoples, where some people argue that maybe it's not appropriate. I think it actually is pretty appropriate, and so we'll talk about it in a minute. But so clearly, there's some relationship between these spirits and shamans and disease and healing, and that's again what at least a big part of what this book is about. Um, the subtitle says it's a collision between two cultures. I think I talked about this in that pre-recorded lecture I gave for you guys, but what are these two cultures? Again, collision of two cultures, right? See right there. What are the two cultures that are colliding here? What are the two cultures that are colliding? like that answer. Hmm. Very good. Yeah. Chat, you guys want to answer this? I don't know if you could hear Lauren. What are the two cultures that are colliding? This is an important question, right? Because in some ways, that's what this whole book is about. And that's what we will be talking about. Chat, you're a little quiet all of a sudden. What's going on? So what Lauren said is we have two things, right? I mean, you can see here, Hmong child, American doctor. So we could say Hmong versus American. Those are two cultures we could be talking about, right? We could be talking about religion versus medicine, or shamanism versus science. There are a lot of things we could talk about, right? And have you ever heard of these sort of dichotomies before? We could even say spirit versus body, or maybe soul versus body, right? These are things we've talked about before, haven't we? It's a big part of religious studies, is thinking about these different categories. And what this book tries to do is find a way to let these two cultures actually talk to each other, which we don't always do so well in our society, I would say. Or we don't necessarily approach the world this way, right? We have a body, and then we have a mind. We have science class, and then we have religion class, and they're sort of separate, right? But what this book tries to do is kind of bring them together. And I like this quote a lot, even though this really is not an academic book. How should I say this? It's not making an argument, right? A lot of the books I give you, the articles I give you, they make an argument, right? There's a thesis. When I give you your prompts, I will ask you a question, right? And you're going to have to make a thesis in response. I'm sure you already know what a thesis statement is, because that's something I've been trying to teach you how to do, is to make a thesis statement and then support that with evidence, right? Is there a thesis statement in this book? Not really. I mean, kind of. This is kind of a thesis statement. Medicine was religion, religion was society. That's an argument of sorts, right? But if you look at that page 60, our author, and her name is Anne Fadiman. So again, when we talk about this book, it's important to know her name. Fadiman just kind of comes out and says it, right? She doesn't really say, and this is my argument now, right? This is the beginning of a chapter, and it's part of a larger conversation. She asks some questions, and then this is her answer to those questions. But I would argue that this kind of is her thesis, if we can pull one out. There are other theses that we could find here, but I think this is kind of her argument. Do you guys agree with her? I'll put it in the chat for emphasis. If you just heard someone say, medicine is religion, religion is society, society is medicine, medicine is economics, would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Why would you say yes?
Because all of those things fold up on each other. For instance, speaking about America, so our country is mainly Christian, and those Christian ideals influence the way we practice medicine, the roles that we have in our society, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so ICE is saying Christian ideas, and we could probably get even more specific than that, but let's just leave it at Christian ideas influence the way we practice medicine. That's another thesis statement, right? That's another argument that, and so ICE agrees with Fadiman's argument. It's actually hard to defend this thesis, right? It's hard to make this argument. Could you get more specific? I said, if the answer is no, that's also fine. Would you be able to defend that thesis if someone said, no, it's not? Religion does not influence medicine.
It does.
What would you say?
So, the only one that comes up to my mind is a pretty touchy topic, but what does come to top of my mind is abortion. And that's because the Bible places a lot of value on human life. And therefore, when many Christians speak out against abortion, they say it's because God gives, um, you know, the gift of life, and therefore taking it away is sin, and etc. and etc. Also, some women when they want to get sterilized, like getting hysterectomies, they have difficulties getting approved for the procedure because Christian ideals in the country have led us to believe that a woman's role is to have children.
Very good. All right.
etc.
So those are excellent responses. Thank you, Aista. So approval of certain surgeries. And I think the topic of abortion, as you said, it is definitely a touchy subject in our society. And really, one of the major issues that separates the Democratic Party from the Republican Party is this very issue, right? And I could frame it this way: is abortion a medical subject, or is it a religious subject? And I think depending on how you answer that question, I can probably guess which political party you belong
I
to.
would like, yeah, I would like to think that it is a medical subject because abortion also has to do with the death of the person that's carrying the baby and the baby itself.
Mhm.
There's a lot, I mean, of course, it's a very touchy subject, and my opinion doesn't necessarily have to be like, I'm not on the high moral ground or anything else, but it's like, you know, it's the life of someone in the sense like it's if there is problems in the pregnancy,
Mhm.
it wouldn't really be fair to, and maybe not even just that, but also, you know, I don't think maternity should be enforced.
Mhm.
But, you know, I know a lot of people think differently because of their religion. But
Mhm.
I also know that religion has a lot of things that may be hypocritical,
Well, so
a lot of contradictions.
that last part is a whole can of worms, right? Is where do religions?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to conveniently ignore that last part, but the first part, I think what you're doing for us, Simone, is you're kind of playing out this conversation as it usually happens in America, where you're trying to be polite about it, and you're basically saying there is room for other ways of thinking. If somebody is more religious, they might think this way. I personally, generally, I think about the subject more medically, and so I think this way, right? And this kind of defines how we talk to each other in America, right? There are two ways to think. They're totally different, and let's just not talk about it if we don't agree, right? Or we can talk about it.
I mean,
We'll get a
I
little.
think it's necessary to talk about it
Well, obviously,
because
that's why I'm
it's
bringing it
also just, yeah, because if we only have it as a debate, then I mean, like I know we all have our opinions and everything, but it's also like we're also talking about something that happens every day.
Yeah.
So like when your opinion gets in the way of people's rights, that's a bit of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what she's saying. While having certain conversations are extremely uncomfortable and they can lead to divisions, it is important to have them because ignoring them only creates more problems in the future.
Mm-hmm. Nicely stated.
What do you mean?
So, like, I can give an example. So, when the AIDS crisis first started happening, many politicians and just people that had influence in general, they didn't speak on it because it was an issue that only affected the gay community. And many of them would be like, "Oh, if you don't say anything, eventually the gay community will just die out on its own." However, when the issue started to spread to other communities, like white women and to people
Oh
that
yeah,
weren't here,
all of a
that's when,
sudden it became relevant.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we can
No,
pose
I think
the
it's
same
a
question, right? Is AIDS a medical subject or is it a religious subject? And in this case, we could say maybe ethical, right? Because the just to take Isis' point, make it more explicit, there were some people, and probably still are some people, who think for two men to sleep together, two women to sleep together is unethical, right? And because AIDS was predominantly affecting those communities, there's a sense that this is God's punishment for that unethical decision. Were you gonna say
Yeah,
something?
I mean, no, it's definitely like, I don't know if it was related to what we're talking about, like AIDS, but I think a lot of when we talked about the like opening the can of worms, what I meant by that is, like, I know that in Christianity, or sometimes you open, I mean, the Bible says kind of like, well, this is a sin, and this is just how it is. But a lot of people sometimes use that conveniently, because I know that a lot of different things in the Bible are like sin. Things that we do every day, like using different materials of clothing, or I don't know, there's a lot of things, but people use religion a lot of times to justify homophobia or sexism, or um like, I'm not saying every Catholic Christian person uses it like that, but it does happen. And I mean, it's more than just a specific person. I think it has a lot to do with the institution itself.
The institution of religion.
Yeah, and some religions more, I mean, I think every religion has its problematic side, but I've definitely kind of anything that's regarding the Bible has been a really big thing.
Okay. Well, fortunately for our class, this is religious studies class, right? And we don't have to take the Bible as the final word on religion. In fact, the Bible doesn't really show up in this book. Let's see, we can look at the index. You guys ever look at indexes? Does the word Bible even appear in this book? It's not in the index. So, in this case, we'll have to think about religion a bit more broadly. Although I do like this discussion, and you guys are kind of taking up, or at least Simone is taking up the second part a little more seriously, which is the intersection of religion and society, which, as you can see from Fadiman's quote, that is part of her argument, right? So the reason I bring up this duality, and again, thank you, Aista and Simone, for kind of playing it out for us, because we live in a world where these are often separate worlds. We live in a country where these are often separate worlds, where medicine is one world and religion is another world. And sometimes people can even cross between them, right? I think we probably all have to a certain degree. But at the same time, they kind of operate separately, right? With separate stories, separate ethical systems. But what Fadiman is trying to do, and you can see she even italicized the word was here, is she's saying medicine was religion, or even medicine is religion. I'd probably state it in the present tense. Medicine is religion. And so I think for somebody, for example, to approach abortion as if there were no religious connotations to it, if there was no emotional development, if it's just bodies and flesh and blood and steel and cutting and that sort of stuff, that's not a human experience anymore, right? That's just one reduced part of that experience. So I think what this book is trying to do is actually bridge that gap that we've created for ourselves. And again, I think Aista and Simone are explaining why we have this gap is because we live in a society where there's quite a bit of disagreement about how we should treat these issues. And in fact, this particular issue, abortion, decides elections, right? There are people who are one issue voters, particularly pro-life voters tend to be, not exclusively, but many tend to be one issue voters. Are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? If you're pro-choice, I'm not going to vote for you. And it goes the other way, right? For pro-choice people, if they hear somebody's pro-life, they tend to think kind of in line with what we were just discussing and say, nope, that's a different world. I don't want anything to do with that world. But what we're going to do in this class and what we're going to do with this book is really try to bridge these worlds. Now, it might be easier for you because we're not talking about Christianity, not in this book. We can talk about it, obviously. But that's not what this book is about, right? This is about a different religion. This is about a different society and trying to bridge that world with medicine. And so I like this conversation because I think it highlights why this gap was created in the first place. Is because the Christian voice tends to be a pretty loud voice in terms of what is and what is not allowed. And so here we created a medical space that is free of such voices, or so we often think. And what this book is reminding us is that actually it is never free of those voices. We might pretend like it is, but it never truly is. What do economics have to do with medicine? Medicine and economics? Question mark? Are those related to each other? Yeah. So Lauren said, depending on your economic situation, you may or may not be able to get certain procedures, right? This is a major problem for America right now. Can you make money off of medicine? Oh yeah, it's big business, right? It's one of the biggest business in America. And we could go into details about that, specific things that are sold. Yaya, do you have thoughts? Big pharma?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Big pharma is obviously making big banks off of people's illnesses and stuff.
Yeah. Now, can we bring religion into that conversation? Medicine plus economics plus religion? Or does religion have to stay out? So for example, if we take Yaya's example of big pharma making bank, where does religion come in there? Or is religion absent?
I guess like something I would say is maybe like if you're religious and you don't want to get a certain procedure because it goes against your religious views, then that's obviously not going to be of profit for the medicine area in regards to making money because you're obviously not going to get the procedure. But that's like if you opt out from that based off of your religion.
Okay, so religion could maybe even kind of rein in some of the profits made from medicine. If we pull the voice of religion out, then everybody will get their procedure, right? Whatever surgery or insulin or whatever it is that they might want to get. If religion comes in, they might challenge the authority of medicine, right? And people might not do it, and then big pharma wouldn't make any money. Another thing we could. Oh, go ahead, Isa.
I want to say that medicine and church go hand in hand. So some churches, one way that they make money is by partnering up with medical research companies, and they gain donations that they give to these research companies. And when those research companies like make a product or something, the churches get a cut of the profit too.
I've not heard of that before, but that's a little disturbing. So, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is the marketing wing of medical companies will go to church communities and try to sell their products in those church communities. That's pretty disturbing. And similar things happen with politics too, right? There's sort of a voting block of the church. And if I'm a politician, I'm running for some position, I might court that church community. So we could say, in addition to economics, there are politics, maybe society is sort of pointing to that too. One thing I'm thinking of, to come back to Yaya's point, is commodification. Remember, this was on your last exam, the commodification of mindfulness, turning mindfulness into a commodity. We have commodified medicine, right? Medicine has become a commodity. Could you imagine a world where medicine is not a commodity? What would that look like? Lauren can't even imagine it. It's too crazy. It's too crazy. What would a world where medicine is not a commodity look like? Now, some of you might be a little shy because you're not sure what a commodity is. So what is a commodity? Right. It's a product that is bought and sold. Exactly. So what would medicine be if it were not a commodity? Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's break it down. Let's say you're a doctor, maybe your family's a doctor, whatever. I'm sick. I have no money to pay you. Would you just ignore me? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's actually not as crazy as it sounds. We in our medical system, if I go to the emergency room and I have like a wound that is bleeding, are they going to say pay us first before we treat your wound? They bill you after, right? And what if I can't pay the bill? Are they going to wound me again and take back their medicine? No, they're not going to, right? You could imagine a world where you don't have to pay for things because this happens in our world. They go into debt and might die with that debt, right? That happens sometimes. People go bankrupt because of the bills they owe. But what I'm talking about is basically a world where you don't have to necessarily pay for medicine. And we kind of do live in that world. It's just there are debts that get attached to it when we can't pay for things. Actually, there are countries where if let's say I go to a hospital and I have a wound, you do have to pay first. Otherwise, they won't treat you. That is an option too. In fact, by comparison, we live in a somewhat socialized medical system. I know this is another political topic. Should we have a more socialized medical system? But we already do have a pretty socialized one. If medicine and healing were completely a product, you'd have to pay first. But we don't live in a world where you have to pay first, right? Especially if you have an emergency.
I have a question. Is like a copay you paying first, or is that still you paying after? Because when I go to the doctor, I have to do my copay before I get any services.
Well, so that's a good point, right? There's depending on your insurance program and depending on the policies of the place where you go. Sometimes you got to do your copay first to show you have some skin in the game, right? And that's the only way they let you in the door. And then your insurance will take the rest of it. So we live in a weird world where medicine is a commodity, but it's also kind of not. And I think, again, this is something we're going to have to figure out in the coming weeks, in the coming months, in the coming years. I don't know how long it will take. Maybe we will never figure it out and it will remain this kind of open question. But it goes to show, right? Medicine is a world we often sort of think of as isolated from the rest of the world, maybe for political reasons, social reasons. But there are important intersections with religion, with economics, and with the rest of society, with politics, right? As we're discussing. And so what Fadiman wants to do is to remind us of these connections and kind of highlight them in pretty powerful ways. Any last thoughts on this? It's a great conversation. All right, let's keep going. So who are the Hmong? I already lectured about this enough. We did the Southeast Asia map quiz. So this is just a reminder that here's Laos, right? Here's the country of Laos. Here's the northern border. And then folks, or sorry, am I reading this map right? No, here is Laos. Here's the northern part of Laos. And then people made it into Thailand and went from Thailand to the United States. So this is really, it's a story about Hmong people who are in the United States and Hmong culture in the United States. We talked about shamans a moment ago. The way you pronounce this word is Sinung. You can see it again on 305 to 306. They tell you how to do it. You don't have to know that. You can just call them shamans. And so this is someone who can interact with the spirit world. And so the reason I was making sort of a fine point on possession versus not being possessed is shamans actually do not become possessed, strictly speaking. They don't have a spirit that enters them, right? There are practices that are like that, but that's not what's happening in this tradition. What happens with a shaman is they can interact with spirits. They go into a trance, they go into the spirit world, and then they talk to the spirits while they are in this trance. So let's look at an example. I think I told you I would show you a soul calling ritual, and this has the body of a pig in it. It's not really graphic or anything, but you will see a dead pig in this. So hopefully that won't be too disturbing for you. If it is, feel free to look away for a moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Banging the gong. Yeah. And so I can remind you, right? We know what these spirits are now. Sometimes the spirit is from somebody recently deceased, right? It could be an ancestor. Have you ever heard of ancestor worship or ancestor veneration, where people light incense and make offerings to their ancestors? You guys ever heard of this sort of thing before? Is there a scene of this in Mulan? I haven't seen Mulan.
Yeah, isn't it similar to when in Japan where they have shrines of all the dead family members, and then like on the anniversary of their deaths, they light incense and put food on an altar?
Yes, yeah. So Lauren was making a similar point. Let's just say, an East Asia connection where these sorts of practices are still pretty common. They're more sort of polite, right? So like in Mulan, for example, I haven't seen it, but she's revering her ancestor. Does she light incense? So it's very common to light incense. People go, like Isa was saying, go to maybe the grave of their ancestors and sort of clean it up. There's a whole holiday that was just, actually, it's the same day as Easter this year. It's called Qingmingjie in China, where people go to the tomb of their ancestors and clean the tomb. Is there a connection with Dia de los Muertos? I actually I don't know as much as.
Yeah, there is a connection.
And it goes to show, right? This is widespread. To respect the dead, obviously, there's sort of a positive aspect to it, is you want to take care of them and respect them and venerate them and that sort of thing. What this ritual is showing is you want to protect yourself too, because if you don't take care of the dead, they might come and look for you, right? That's what's being implied here. Is that when people die, it's actually a dangerous situation. You've probably seen some movies where this sort of thing happens. Simona, do you want to talk? I don't want to cut you off if you have thoughts.
Oh no, I just wanted to talk about Dia de los Muertos,
Please.
which basically in Latin America, and this is in Chile too, the connection between people who are dead and people who are alive is very like clear, in the sense like they coexist.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of culture has to do, there's this really interesting genre of books that's really common in Latin America, which is called realismo mágico, which is like how in real life there's magic. And basically what that has to do is like, I don't know if you, yeah, magical realism, yeah,
Yeah.
is that a lot of things are connected. So a lot of indigenous Chilean culture, more than anything, has to do with this connection of the spirit world with people who are living, especially because there's a lot of ghost towns in Chile too.
Mm-hmm.
And in Mexico as well. So a lot of books have to do with people who normally they go and they contact their ancestors and they connect with them. And I read this really, really, really good book. It had a ton of kind of small novels, like more like stories of this Chilean woman. She wrote it, and she talked about, for example, this girl who her mom was passing away, but before her mom passed away, she kind of had a message from her grandmother, And she went out and she traveled across a lot of places in Latin America, and she basically talked to her ancestors. And it's really, really cool, really interesting, because a lot of the concept is just that we live with the dead, and that it's not scary. You know, death isn't scary. It's just a part of living, and that the people who are die are always with you. And a lot of these like offerings, especially in Dia de los Muertos, which is different. You know, we don't have Dia de los Muertos in Chile, but it is this kind of thing that's like you pay respect, you live with them, you give them things that like they're their favorite. So whether that's like food that you put out for them, you put out their like favorite meal or a book that they liked. And it's this really peaceful, really nice way of looking at a situation that can be very weird to deal with. And I say weird because it's really odd to think of letting go of someone who's constantly present and not being able to hear from them again. But in a lot of Latin American culture, that's not true, because you will hear from them again.
Excellent.
Or you will see them.
Yeah.
That's mostly it.
Very good. So yeah, thank you for that. And it ties in with these kind of strange questions I was giving you earlier, right? We often approach death this way. It's either or, right? Their heart stops, their brain stops, they're gone. They're dead. There's nothing left, right? Say goodbye. The lights are out, right? This is the medical approach. But what Simone was just describing, we could call maybe a religious approach. And we usually treat these separately. They're in heaven. Or, as Simone was describing, they're actually somehow tied up with this world too, which again feels maybe superstitious. It feels like, you know, something from traditional society. But what Fadiman wants to do is remind us that it must be both. It can't be one or the other, right? To treat somebody who you used to love 10 minutes ago as if they're a piece of lunch meat now is totally unfair to them, and it's totally unfair to yourself, right? There are more than that.
This might be.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
No, that what I was gonna say is that this might be a bit of a stretch, but a lot of we think of things that might be like superstitious, also as things that we don't see in Western culture. So, for example, if we think about death kind of like how Western culture defines death, which is, you know, someone passes away and they're gone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the reality. So I'm saying that I think maybe for a lot of people who come from like predominantly white countries, it might seem superstitious, but it's not necessarily superstitious.
Well, and what I'm trying to do is rail against this idea of superstitious, right? Because again, we could have science versus superstition. We could add that to this list. But what Fadiman wants to do in this book is bridge this gap, right? And find a way to connect these things. She's not saying get rid of medicine, right? Medicine's important. The hospital is important. But she's also saying we need to kind of make sense for religion. And I guess one thing we should remember, we talked about this collision of two cultures. We have sort of the American biomedical culture and the Hmong folk religion culture. Is Fadiman from either of these cultures? Is Fadiman Hmong? Is Fadiman a doctor? She's an outsider to both, right? And so this makes her position actually kind of special. She's an outsider to both cultures, but she's also very smart and very good at research. And I don't think I answered the question about what sort of book this is. This is a book of journalism. We could call it investigative reporting. This is not a novel. All of you are going to be very tempted to call this a novel. This is sort of a joke among professors, actually, where students always call books novels. This is not a novel. And when I read your papers, some of you will write, in her novel, Fadiman says, but this is not a novel, right? This is a book. You can call it a book. In her book, Fadiman says. You could even call it a monograph. I think this could be called a monograph. This is a report, right? It's a journalistic report, we could say that, in her essay. You know, this is a bit too long to be an essay, but it is many things. But this is primarily a work of journalism. You could say in her work. That's another thing you could say. But don't call it a novel if you're listening to me right now. Most of the things you read, at least in this class, are not novels, in fact. Maybe I'll rant about that later. I think it's time to keep moving on. So yeah, I appreciate the discussion here, because a lot of the time, again, it's hard to think about this world as a very realistic one, but I think all these examples we're discussing here bring this alive in a way, right? So if we go back to the soul calling ritual, what's going on here? There's a sense that the man who was sick, right, who was sitting at the table, he's clearly alive, right? He wasn't like dead or, you know, really emaciated and like lying on a hospital bed or anything like that. He looked kind of healthy from the outside, but something was wrong with him. I don't know what it was. We could perhaps ask him let's see, where is soul loss described? Is it on page 100? I kind of don't remember. Let's look at page 100. So this is now Cal. He's the father of the family. This was the end of what we were reading for today. So we're getting pretty far into the book. But now Cal said, he's talking about a shadow. He says, your soul, or sorry, he's talking about your soul. He says, your soul is like your shadow. Sometimes it just wanders off like a butterfly. And that is when you are sad. That's when you get sick. If it comes back to you, that is when you are happy and you are well again. Sometimes the soul goes away, but the doctors don't believe it. I would like you to tell the doctors to believe in our Nung. And this comes from the name for a shaman. Let's see, it keeps going. The doctors can fix some sicknesses that involve the body and blood, but for us Hmong, some people get sick because of their soul. They need spiritual things. With Leah, it is good to do a little medicine and a little Nung, but not too much medicine because the medicine cuts the Nung's effect. If we did a little of each, she didn't get sick as much, but the doctors wouldn't let us give a little medicine because they didn't understand about the soul. So what is he talking about? If you wanted to translate that into sort of our common cultural language, what would you say is he talking about when he says soul loss? What does it mean to lose your soul, according to what Naukal was just talking about? Okay. Have you guys ever had that feeling before? I'll read it again. Your soul is like your shadow. Sometimes it just wanders off like a butterfly, and that is when you are sad, and that is when you get sick. And if it comes back to you, that is when you are happy and you are well again. What is he talking about? Have you guys ever felt that way? Sad and sick? Kind of. That's what came to my mind. What does depression have to do with soul loss? Could you think of depression as a form of soul loss? What do you lose when you become depressed? Motivation? Yeah. Personality? Yeah. Maybe he's talking about personality, right? Do you guys ever feel like you've sort of just lost your spunk or something? Like you usually are more interested in being alive and being out in the world and talking to people, and now you just feel like kind of a shell of yourself, like something is missing. You guys ever had that feeling before? Now, of course, we wouldn't call it soul loss, but then again, if we don't have a name for it, it's sort of hard to take care of it, isn't it? So it's an interesting term, right? Again, it feels kind of quaint. It feels like some very strange traditional practice. When we saw the pig and the gongs and the bells and all that sort of stuff, it might feel a little bit weird. But when we think about, you know, what they do to heal it is also kind of interesting. Could you tell what the practice is? So one thing is there's the sick person and the shaman and the pig. But were they by themselves? Was this like a therapist? Because obviously what we do is we talk to our therapist, right? Like that's what we're supposed to do. Were they by themselves? Was it just a one-on-one healing session? The whole community was there. Yeah, everybody was there. And just to be clear, I you know what? I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to guess they eat that pig, right? And that pig is way too big for two people to eat, right? This is a community affair. Now imagine if you were depressed and your friends pulled you out of bed and tied you to a dead pig and then did a ritual, but then you had a big party afterward and you all ate a giant pig together and you're laughing and having a good time and maybe you get a gong bang near your head or something. Would that be sort of fun? Why do I think they eat the pig? Because it's a party, right? The whole point of killing the pig is to send its soul to the demon, right? The demon is hungry for a soul. And so it is threatening the sick person. But once we feed the demon with the pig soul, then its work is done. And why would you waste the pig's body? Right? The soul is already doing the work.
Well, isn't it an exchange though? So like you're taking the bad soul from the person who's sick and you're putting that soul into the pig, and then you're taking the healthy pig soul, putting it in the healthy back into the human. So why would you eat the pig if it's technically, if it has the bad soul? Wouldn't that just put the bad soul right back into your body? Like I just wouldn't eat something that's obviously has a bad spirit in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then because I would think that I'm putting that shit right back into my body.
Right. So that's a good question, Yaya. And I think it highlights the difference between this idea of being possessed and having an interaction with the spirit. So I love your question. It shows you're really thinking about this. So let's see. Can I use, maybe I'll try to draw it. So here's the sick person. Right? Here's the dead person. So what is the problem? Is the dead person turns into a ghost, and the ghost is threatening, let's make it look like a scary ghost. The ghost is trying to threaten the sick person, right? Maybe they've even taken their soul. So what do? Let's take a pig. Can you guys see this? Let's take a pig. What do pigs look like? They have pointy ears. Pointy ear, pig, oink, oink. We kill the pig, and so instead of going after the living person, the ghost changes its mind, and it goes after the soul of the pig. Just the soul, though. And so instead of the body, then we've got, let's just make it a pig ghost, right? Well, I guess they don't have to be dead because they're ghosts. They got a pig ghost, and so now this guy is going after him. And so we can just forget about them. They'll go away. And we're left, that guy's got his body and his soul, and we got the pig body. So the pig body is clean. This is my argument. I'm not positive that this is how they would look at it, but this is how I would look at it. The pig body is clean, so you might as well eat it. What do you guys think? Do you buy it? Does that make sense, Yaya?
Yeah. It makes sense.
So I'm gonna look this up for you because I haven't read this book looking for this precise detail. I'm positive that it is in here. So I will find this out. I think it's in the very last chapter. We can, actually, I might be able to find it right now. Do they eat the pig? They're talking about the pig here, the pig's neck. I don't know if they talk about eating the pig or not. So, all right, let's leave it ambiguous for now, but this is how I understand it. Because the pig is not being possessed, and he's not being possessed. Something is being taken away from him, and now it is being given back, right? And that is his soul. But the bad guy is just looking for souls. He's not looking for bodies. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And so this is what we could call folk religion, right? So what is folk? Who are the folk? It's everybody, right? So folk religion is for everybody. Some people call it popular religion, not because it's the most popular fad right now, because it's for the people, right? All the people practice this religion. So across Hmong society, high people, low people, elite people, regular people, everybody buys into this religion. And again, they do eat the pig. I just Googled. Okay, thank you, Yaya. Very good. I'm glad we can solve that one. And again, it supports, what I might call a psychological approach to this. Is how do you cure depression? Is you have a dinner party, right? There's another way to think about this. I mean, obviously, there's the shaman, and I don't mean to discount the shaman. I think the shaman's important. That's why we're reading this book. But at the same time, if you don't believe in the shaman and you feel like that's just hocus pocus, how do you cure depression? Is you have a dinner party, right? Otherwise known as bringing somebody's soul back. Now, of course, that a lot of people would disagree with me on that formulation, but a lot of people wouldn't want to do this whole soul calling thing too. So I'll leave it up to you guys to whether you want to agree with me on that or not. So what we have 10 minutes left. Let's think about the other side. So I found just sort of a stock image of doctors. Here are some doctors. Can you almost smell the air of the hospital when you see them in their white jackets and that sort of thing? Now, this is all, again, supposed to sort of look like there is no religion, there's no culture, this is just science, right? These are scientific doctors. And that's sort of how this chapter is presented. So, looking at page 69, which chapter is that? Yeah, high velocity transcortical lead therapy. It's kind of a disturbing title to this chapter. Did anybody figure out what that chapter is referring to? What that title is referring to? High velocity transcortical lead therapy. We'll get to it in a minute if you couldn't figure it out. But let's start with this idea. They talk about a cultural barrier. Now, you guys have heard of a language barrier, right? What is a language barrier?
Language barriers when two groups of people can't communicate properly or there's misunderstandings because they speak two different languages.
Exactly.
So in terms of cultural barriers, I think it means because of the two different cultures, there's a mismatch in between what the other person thinks the other person is perceiving.
Yeah. So
yeah.
we can translate the word shaman into English. We can translate the word spirit into English. But does that mean we can necessarily climb over this cultural barrier and enter into this world of shamans and spirits? Not easily. Actually, I think we're doing a pretty good job in this class. I feel like I've taught this before, and it's hard. What I'm asking you guys to do is basically climb over a wall into a world in which maybe you've never been before, or perhaps you have been in some circumstances, but do not always exist in that world, right? And so when we talk about a cultural barrier, the person saying this works at the hospital, right? This would be like a doctor who has very specific ideas about how the world works, about how the body works, about what death means, about what life means, trying to communicate across this world, and this world is a major challenge. Even if you have translators in the room, they're talking about shamans, they're talking about spirits and soul calling and all this sort of stuff. Even if you have excellent translators in the room, if they're not like trained anthropologists, this is going to be a pretty hard time, right? To communicate across this cultural barrier. So I think it's an important concept. It seems kind of simple on the face of it, but it's actually pretty profound, I think. Just because you know somebody's language does not necessarily mean you know their culture. There are exceptions to that, right? There are languages where the ideas are actually very, very similar. Maybe they even share the same culture. They just happen to speak about it in different ways. But then in this example, we can, I think, say with pretty strong confidence that there's a major cultural barrier operating here. What I was initially thinking is we could spend some time going through this. Obviously, class is already almost done, so we can just talk about it together. What is high velocity transcortical lead therapy talking about? Can you understand any of those words? It's on page 63. So if you're following along, you can look it up. What words can you understand from that? I'll type it out. How did you know that, Lauren? Because you read the book. All right, very good. See, I'm playing a bit of a game here, but Lauren already knows. So you guys in the chat probably, I don't know, can you hear Lauren? I never know if you can hear Lauren or not. Maybe they're not interested. So, okay. Not really. All right. So Yaya doesn't know either. So lead, what is lead talking about? Lead is a metal, right? Transcortical, what is cortical talking about? Trans means to go across something, right? What do you think cortical means? Let's see if the dictionary has this. It's a very specialized terminology, right? So it's relating to the nerve pathways which cross the cerebral cortex of the brain. So it's talking about the cortex, transcortical, transcortex. High velocity, you know what velocity means, don't you? Something that goes fast. So when lead moves quickly through the brain, what happens to the brain? What happens to the person? What happens to the body in which that brain sits?
Don't they bleed? Isn't it like a bullet going through your head?
It is a bullet through your head. Yeah, like Lauren said, they're talking about shooting someone. Why would these doctors be talking about high velocity transcortical lead therapy? They mean it as a joke. Let's see. So Fadiman is talking to someone named Bill, just like me. Why would these doctors be telling jokes about shooting Hmong people in the head? Again,
Are they racist?
Are they racist? Well, I'll leave that up to you, I say. You could write a nice paper about that, in fact. They would not put it that way. And again, this book is from the 80s and 90s. I think we could look back and say, yeah, kind of racist, actually. And, you know, anybody who's talking about an entire group of people and saying the best thing they can do for them is shoot them in the head, there's something pretty disturbing about that. But if you read this page, it tries to explain why. Because again, Fadiman is trying to be this peacekeeper, right? She's between these two different worlds. Why are they so frustrated with the Hmong? Here are some examples when it comes to surgery, contraception, birth, somatization, right? The next few pages are all about this topic. It's basically trying to give you a perspective from the doctor side. What does it feel like to be a doctor on the other side of this cultural barrier? You know, this guy with his salt and pepper hair and his nice little charming mustache and smile, right? I don't know who he is, but he's just trying to do his job. He's just trying to do the surgery or prescribe the medicine. And these Hmong people keep coming in and complaining about things that don't make any sense, right? And so, for example, on page 70, they recommend the Hmong cocktail. Motrin, an anti-inflammatory, Elavil, an antidepressant, vitamin B12, but the patients do not usually get better. For the underlying problem, there is no treatment that it was in my power to offer. So these Hmong patients keep showing up and saying, hey, I feel sick, kind of like maybe this sort of sickness, right? Who knows? Complaining about whatever. And the doctors are like, bro, we don't see anything wrong with you. We don't know what to prescribe to you. Please leave us alone, right? They feel frustrated with this inability to communicate. Now, one thing I want to remind you of is these are people who lived through a war, right? We also have a word for this now. What is the soul loss, let's say? What do you think they might be complaining about? At least some of these people who lived through this war. PTSD, right? You guys all know what that is now, right? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe you've heard this before, but that's kind of a new word, right? There used to be another word, shell shock. Have you heard of shell shock before? So after World War II, people would come home, I don't know what to say. Let's just say have deeply embedded trauma, and they would be called shell shocked, and they basically would just drink themselves to death. There's a whole generation of people after World War I, World War II. Eventually, we have this language of stress now, and there's an observable, let's say, medically verifiable issue called PTSD. If we do a body scan, will we find something wrong with them? Probably not. But when we think about what is going on with these Hmong patients, that's probably what is going on, from my very unprofessional opinion, right? So after dozens of gastrointestinal series, electromyograms, blood tests, CT scans, the Merced doctors began to realize many Hmong complaints had no organic basis. though the pain was perfectly real. So again, if we think about what is this soul loss, this is maybe another way we could diagnose it, right? Another one of these more, let's say, mental, emotional issues. So in our final minute, maybe we can wrap this up just by thinking, what is the conflict? We can go back to this one. What is the conflict here? We see one way of thinking about the world and thinking about ourselves through medicine, embodied by these doctors. We don't even have to worry about specific doctors. We see another way of thinking about the world and society, and that is through religion, right? Through this Hmong folk religion. And this story, the story of Leah Lee, is a story of their collision of these two different worlds. And spoiler alert, a lot of you already know this. Leah Lee gets taken away from her family. On page 85, they start to talk about it. So she gets taken to Dee and Tom Corda. Those are her foster parents. And so a lot of the time we can just agree to disagree, right? If we have a religious point of view or maybe a medical point of view. But in this particular example, agreeing to disagree is not an option, right? And a little girl is taken away from her family. So maybe something you can think about as you are reading, and this is something you could potentially write about, is was this the right thing to do? And if you think I have like a strong opinion, I kind of don't. It's an impossible situation. And so it's actually a very good question to think about is what do you do in this case, this story of Leah Lee? So we'll get back to the details of that next time. We'll focus on her and her family. Okay, so good discussion today, guys. I enjoyed that. Any last thoughts or questions?